We are witnesses and custodians of the greatest mystery and beneficiaries of the most beautiful love story in cosmic history. Have you heard those words before somewhere? Sirs, we want to know Jesus, not just see, as many of your translations have. There's a recognition that we've been working with over these past few weeks, and it's clearly there's a difference between knowing about Jesus and knowing Jesus. So, on week 1, we began to understand what we need to know about Jesus by looking at his genealogy. And in it, we saw that race or gender or even our past doesn't matter. We should love as he loves. In weeks 2 to 4, we considered that little statement in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, that Jesus grew in wisdom and maturity and in grace with God and man. And we saw how important spiritual formation is in those 3 areas. Last week, we looked at Jesus' 5-part ministry strategy that he taught his disciples to use, including us. Now, I know you've got this all memorized, and you've been working with it this whole time. So how's it going? Crickets. Well, it's new information, right? But I keep getting emails and texts from some of you saying, you know, this is really changing my life. One person even said, you're preaching much better now than you used to. I don't know what that's about, but hey, week 6's question. What do we need to lose and gain most in order to really know Jesus? Did you pick it all out of the gospel passage this morning? Because it's a continuation of last week. And didn't it kind of stun you at the very end of the passage where it said, even though they had seen everything that Jesus did in feeding the 5,000, they couldn't understand what was going on because their hearts were hardened. Wow, let's figure out what that means. And let's do so by talking about some things we need to lose in order to know Jesus. You might want to get out a pen or a pencil. You might want to prick your finger and use blood. You might want to, I don't know, use your phone and take a few notes this morning. Here are some things we need to lose in order to know Jesus. The first thing we need to do is we need to lose our fossil heart. You know what a fossil heart is? Stone. What else is it? As a southerner would say it, it's dead. It's dead. Fossils are dead. They're all dead. Even though we used to call some of our professors fossils, and they were alive, or at least we saw their lips moving, it had maybe been a long time since they changed their curriculum. A fossil heart. So that verse, 62, the second, or 52, the second part, but the disciples' hearts were hardened. Now, this is a crucial phrase. The hearts were hardened. What does it mean? Well, it means at one point that they were once alive. All fossils were once alive. Any of you ever found a fossil? Any of you marry a fossil? No, I'm just okay, they were once alive. But what happened? They were trauma overwhelmed. Now, that's not gobbledygook psycho speech. They were trauma overwhelmed. Josh and I used to hunt fossils when he was a little guy. And Josh actually had an eye problem for which he needed glasses for a while and now needs contacts. But we were driving up out of a quarry. We were 150 feet down in the quarry. Those were the days when people weren't quite as concerned about insurance as they are now. And we were driving up and Josh said, stop. So I stopped and he said, that rock. And I kid you not, the rock was probably as tall as the distance from the floor to the screen over here. And just about that wide. And I looked at the rock and I said, yeah, that's a pretty cool rock. He said, no, the fossil in the rock. All there was a little nose and a couple of eyes of a trilobite. Phacops rana, we figured out. And he had seen it. So we got out of the car, went over to the rock. Sure enough, there it was. And I said, I think we can get this out. So we went and got our chisels and our hammers, and we very, very, very carefully chipped it out of the rock, and it fits right in the palm of my hand. Now, what had happened to this little guy? It was clear from the matrix that a deluge of mud, likely, had come and covered him and killed him. The coolest thing about this one, he wasn't flattened. He was round and his bug eyes were sticking out. When I say bug eyes, I really do mean it. Because they had all of those tiny little concentric circles that a fly has. He had a compound eye. And we took it home, and then we decided, this looks unique enough. Let's take it to the Royal Ontario Museum, which we did. And they looked at it and they said, where did you find this? Oh, we found it in the quarry up in Bowmanville. Well, do you realize that we've never found one that wasn't squashed? And my hand immediately went, you can't have it. So it's in my house in a little box with a little glue stuck to a beautiful little shadow box up on our wall. But it still doesn't change the fact that this little guy was trauma overwhelmed. In this case, it was a flood, likely. He was once alive, and now he's just artfully dead. I have a whole bunch of other fossils too, with all kinds of beautiful antennae and everything. They're just really gorgeous. Some of you in the philosophy class have seen them. I also have dinosaur poop. All of these fossils are, to me, really pieces of art. They were all once alive. They were all trauma overwhelmed. They were all of that and now are artfully dead. I say artfully because they're really cool to look at, but they're dead. And as far as we know, there are no more. Now, I wouldn't count on that because somewhere in the ocean there may be trilobites that are still alive. But why all this? It's simply because we're talking about disciples. Is it possible that disciples could be once alive and then trauma overwhelmed and now artfully dead? That could be the state of a church with beautiful people in it. They may look alive. You may not be able to see the trauma, but they may be artfully dead. That's not you, is it? I hope it's not me. So let's get rid of our fossil hearts this morning. You ready to do that? Close your eyes and pray this with me. Dear Lord, this is a participation thing. Dear Lord, I am your child. Use me any way you wish today. I'll respond. Amen. I pronounce you all no longer fossils, in case you were. So get rid of fossil heart. Get rid of misunderstanding. I deliberately spelled it that way, and I deliberately put a hyphen there so it wouldn't be miss as in gender-related ladies. Got it? Here we go. Here's the verse. For the disciples did not understand about the loaves. How could this be? Well, a critical analysis of this little text tells us what it means. They witnessed the same event. They shared the same outcome. And what happened? No one could make sense or derive meaning or apply it to their lives. Now, you know what's even more amazing about this? How many baskets were left over of 5 loaves and 2 fish. How many baskets? 12. How many disciples are there? 12. Why do you think there were 12 baskets left over for 12 disciples? So that they could hold in their hands, each of them, something tangible that said, God did something miraculous here. That should be proof enough, right?
Yes.
Wrong. They couldn't make sense of it. I'm sorry. This is like a Homer Simpson moment. Duh, what does this mean? Huh. I wonder if we can save this for tomorrow. Can you imagine? I mean, I'm sure I would have been different than all the other disciples. I would have picked this thing up. I would have looked at it and said, oh my goodness, this, that, out of this? Hey, can we do that again? Don't you think that the disciples ought to have been asking, hey, can we do that again? Can we do it all over? Hey, Jesus, what are you doing tomorrow? Because we're ready. Can we do this again tomorrow? When Rose and I first started out in ministry, we were on an ambassador and mission team. That means that every day we went out to talk to people about Jesus. The first day was horrible. Why? Because we were scared. Our hearts were hardened. And we were in our early 20s. We were already fossils. But what happened? The second day got a little easier. The third day got a little easier. The fourth day, wow, not so hard. The fifth day, hey, guess what? Somebody I talked to came to know Jesus and they're coming to our meeting tonight. And that began to happen over and over and over again. And we still get notes from people. Hey, I'm so glad that your ambassadors and mission team came to our town because I saw you in the high school. I saw you as a little kid in the elementary school. I listened to you when you were in the pub. Yes, we did pubs with Christian music. And my life was changed. Why? Because we were able to apply the lesson of the loaves and the fishes. No misunderstanding. So get rid of a fossil heart and get rid of misunderstandings. Get rid of supernaturalism. What? I thought I'm supposed to have an idea of the supernatural. Well, let me explain, because the text says, and Jesus got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. It should have said, and they were, no big deal. Now, why would I say that? Well, here's the big realization. They were utterly astounded. What that means is they were assaulted, taken aback. Actually, the word means punched in the nose. It was beyond belief. They did not expect God to be in that situation. How do you know that? Because they said, remember last week? Hey, we better send them away into the cities around to get food. And Jesus said, nah, why don't you take care of this? They could not put Jesus naturally into their daily lives. Now you get it? We need to get rid of our supernaturalism. We need to get rid of our non-expectation of God working in our everyday lives. Right? Right? Now, I didn't expect you to say, yeah, right away. You know why? Because it's confusing. I thought he's supposed to be supernatural. Yeah, but when you walk with God every day, when you know Jesus, it's natural. No more supernatural. Supernatural is what unknowers think about God working in their everyday lives. This is natural. This is every day. Oh, but we'll take it for granted if he works in our lives every day. Really? I won't. But I don't see him working in my life every day. Still breathing. But I got a diagnosis of a life-threatening disease. Where is he? We're coming to that. So get rid of your fossil heart, your misunderstanding, and your supernaturalism. Now this one's easy. Get rid of your terror and fear. Not like that's foreign to our culture today, right? How many of you are actually still afraid of catching the virus even though you've been vaccinated? How many of you will never admit that you're still terrified? Yeah. So, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid." They were scared in two forms. One, they were terrified. Two, they were afraid. Jesus knew their hearts. To be terrified means to have your heart ripped out. That's what it literally means. To be afraid means that fear shakes your confidence. So what happens if you're terrified and afraid? You become hopeless. Or maybe put it another way, you experience less hope on your way to hopeless. Are you terrified or afraid of the days to come? I have to tell you, there were, in those early days, there were terror and fear that kind of gripped my heart about the virus because I've worked with viruses for more than 40 years. And I know what they can do in devastating a human being. So I was really careful. I put on the mask, I shopped at 6 a.m., I brought all the groceries home, I wouldn't let Rose touch them, I handled them alone, put them all on the kitchen floor, washed cardboard cereal boxes. I didn't soak them, but I cleaned them with bleach and water. And then, trying not to touch anything, I went and took a shower. Then I felt reasonably safe. I kind of wish we thought about sin that way. We were so concerned about sin that we were really careful of the things that we did. But we've learned to live with sin, haven't we? And we've learned to live with coronavirus. And now we're just a little bit more blasé about it. But can you remember the terror and the fear? And do you think that that's your last experience with terror or fear? Likely not. So get rid of the fossil heart. Get rid of the misunderstanding. Get rid of the supernaturalism and get rid of the terror. Self-sufficiency. I mean, that couldn't keep us from knowing Jesus, could it? Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida. And then later on in the text, he meant to pass them. I've always wondered about the second part of those verses. I think I've got an answer for you. So 2 clues to self-sufficiency. What did he do? He made the disciples embark on the boat. What were they? The guys who were manning the boat, giving it sort of the pilot direction, were fishermen. Big deal. That's like, hey, could you come and pick me up in your car? Do you stress over that? Are you terrified? Are you afraid? No, you've got hundreds, maybe even thousands or hundreds of thousands of miles on your frame and on your car. I can do this. So the disciples were back to the routine. And what does it mean that he meant to pass by them? Well, think about it. They were back to the reliable routine of using a boat. Does the fact that Jesus meant to pass by them, was he acknowledging their desire to be self-sufficient? And maybe he just walked by and see what happened. Well, maybe he was trying to give them a picture of what it might be like to have life without Jesus. I've heard people ask me in difficult times, where was God when my child was killed? And I've been able to say confidently, right there. Your child is in the loving embrace of Jesus. Does that make it any easier for parents? Probably only slightly in that moment. Does it make it easier as life goes on? Yes. Where was God when I was diagnosed with terminal cancer? Right there. Does it make it any easier in the moment when you hear the words from the doctor? Only slightly. But it's the God's honest truth. He's there. And I've also heard people say, I went through those kinds of things and I can't imagine what life would have been like had God not been there. Let's get rid of our self-sufficiency. And let's get rid of our suffering deficiency. They were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. Two kinds of suffering. One, they were making headway painfully, and the wind was against them. What does that mean? Suffering is always painful. Suffering is never anything but painful. It might be psychologically painful, it might be physically painful, it might be emotionally painful, but it's painful. And usually it's all of those. When circumstances seem against us, what this word means, by the way, the wind was against them, it was driving against them. We got in the plane last week, coming from Nashville back home, and the pilot said, I'm sorry, folks, we're going to get to Southern California about 35 minutes early. And everybody went, oh, yay! And he said, the reason being, we have almost no winds. We'll be able to make this trip really fast. We think about going to Nashville at about 3 hours and 35 minutes and coming back at about 4 hours and 10 minutes because of the winds. Circumstances were against the disciples. They were making headway, but they were doing it painfully. This contributed to a lack of really knowing Jesus. We can get so caught up with suffering or so numb to it that we don't have a theology of it or an understanding of it, that we experience a suffering deficiency. Just because we're suffering doesn't mean we don't know Jesus. Let me make it practical. The last time you did something wrong and things didn't go well, did you have that thought, I wonder what I screwed up? I wonder what I did bad. I wonder what God is punishing me for. I wonder why it hurts. The last one, God-SCARCITY. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. This is, of course, Jesus. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. Get all those phrases in there? 3 abandonments. Jesus took leave of them. He went to the mountain to pray. Jesus was alone on the land. What does it mean? Jesus appears scarce. Please get that sentence. Jesus appears scarce. Is he scarce? How do you know? You'll see in a minute. He appears scarce. The disciples feel alone. Where is God when it hurts? I was reading some articles yesterday from Phil Yancey. Phil Yancey is an evangelical that writes beautiful books on where is God when it hurts, and what's so amazing about grace. And he talks about pain and suffering. One of the few evangelicals that's able to do this with such credibility. But in his analysis, he almost always comes down to the fact that we feel God scarce many times. We feel alone. It appears that God may have forsaken us. So when we get to that point, got all those listed, the fossil heart, the misunderstanding, all of those things, got them all. You just get rid of those. But now I've got something to give you. The scripture has something to give you that's going to help you fill all of that gap of the things you thought you needed. You ready? Jesus is always with us. You're probably going, duh, you mean all of that just to get to this? Let me just show you something, because you can use this when you talk to people when they're in difficult circumstances. Jesus went up to the mountain to pray, and he saw that they were making headway painfully. About the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He got into the boat with them. I want you to notice something. You ready? What's the first word that's in yellow there? Pray. Jesus was praying. Were the disciples alone? He was praying. What's the next word? He saw them. And what's the next phrase you see in yellow? He came to them. And what's the fourth phrase you see? He got into the boat. When do you not feel alone? Mostly when Jesus is in the boat. But if he's still coming to you, you might not see him. Or if he sees you, but you don't see him, or if he's praying for you and you don't know that he is praying for you, you might think you're all alone until he gets in the boat. Have you heard people say, and then God showed up? Have you heard them? Have you ever said that? I'm going to take you to remedial theology class. Yeah. Why? Because we are so addicted to the only way that Jesus is there is if he's in the boat with us. We can touch him and handle him. When was the last time you touched and handled Jesus? When was it, Anne? Can't do that anymore, right? In fact, it says that in one of John's epistles. It says, we used to touch and handle him. That's in the aorist Greek tense. But you know what else it says? We keep on hearing and seeing him. And what's that the criteria for? Being an apostle. And what's an apostle? A person who's willing to stand out front, to talk to people for the first time. A pioneer. So we've got all this evidence about what's going on, but the text answers two questions. When was Jesus not with his disciples? Let me give you a hint.
Never.
When was Jesus with his disciples? Let me give you a hint.
Always.
Well, how about two more questions? When is Jesus not with us? Look at that. When you speak out the word, it shows up on the screen. It's really amazing. And when is Jesus with us? Again. You say, Pastor Bill, this is so simple. Why did you bother to take a whole Sunday to talk about this? The reason I did is because what? This is the way we live our lives, unless we're reminded. Pastor Bill, you're not like really happy like this because you think we're not very bright, are you? No, I'm excited about this because I need to be reminded about this too. Do you know what happened to me last Monday when I got a text from somebody saying, I just found out I have COVID-19 and I was in your service on Saturday? Do you know what I did? We've been so careful. How could this be possible? I knew if we let people in from other churches, they would bring COVID-19 to us. I knew it. Where are you, God? And I'd already been studying for this sermon for 5 weeks. The text helps us know Jesus because he prays for us, he sees us, he comes to us, and he gets in the boat with us. In other words, though manifesting differently, Jesus is always with us. That's the best slide today, right there. If you don't make any notes on anything else, that's the best slide today. And that's why Mark put this in his gospel, because we as human beings are not used to understanding that Jesus is always with us, but he's with us in different ways. But he is never not with us. He is always with us. So the flowers that we have up here today are a reminder of a beautiful sister that made sure that life was never dull for any of us. As somebody told me last night, she brought sunshine into the room every single time. Can I tell your story? Yesterday, JR, as we were changing back into street clothes, he said, I remember this one time when we were at an especially cantankerous vestry meeting, which we don't have anymore. And he said, Linny pinched me hard, like my mother would pinch me. And she leaned over to me and said, you don't have to win this one. Be quiet. JR is the only one who's ever done that, by the way. Ever said a little bit more than what he should. And then on the other hand, he could feel Brownie Morton's hand massaging his. It was almost like on the left and on the right, both of these godly women were saying, JR, chill. And JR's reaction was not to go, JR's reaction was to go, thank you, God, for my mother and these two mothers. Did I get it pretty right? Mm-hmm. Jesus is even better than that. So I hope from now on you'll expect a pinch. And I hope from now on you'll expect a massage. Because whether he's praying or seeing or walking towards you or in the boat with you, he is always there. Now, wasn't it worth coming to church this morning? What do we need to lose and gain in order to really know Jesus? Lose 7 things. That's complete enough to gain the whole world with Jesus. James put it this way, incarnate the word. In other words, apply it. Don't let your heart die. Don't become a fossil. Incarnate the word. Don't just